Hello everybody, this is Rabbi Marcus Rubenstein. Welcome to the Daily Derech. Today is the 6th day after Shabbat Kodesh, the 17th of Adar, 5786, corresponding in the secular calendar to Friday, March 6th, 2026. We will read Parashat Vayakel Pekudei this coming Shabbat, as well as the special Maftir Parsha of Parah, as we are about to discuss. We are 26 days from Pesach. Let's begin. We start with Me'am Loez. This week we've been learning Me'am Loez on the Parsha of Ki Tisa, but we're going to spend a day learning about the special Parsha of Parah, or the special Parsha of the cow. This is one of the 4 special Parshiot that are read before the holiday of Passover. We've already read 2 of them. We've read Zechor already, and we've read Shkalim, and now we're going to read Parah. Parah is a special Maftir Parsha that talks about this really weird mitzvah, and that is the mitzvah of the red heifer. And the idea is that everybody who touches or is in contact with a dead body becomes spiritually impure. Now, it's very important to understand that spiritual impurity doesn't mean you're somehow bad or you're somehow there's something terrible about you, you've done something wrong. It just happens to be the status, similar to, you get dirt on your hands. It's not like you've done something wrong. You just have dirt on your hands, right? It just happens to be that way. And the only thing that purity and impurity really matters for in this case is access to the temple, being able to go to the temple and make a sacrifice there and be in its precincts. And in a case where we've had contact with a dead body, we become impure until we do something about it. And what we do about it is the red heifer. The ritual of the red heifer is that a totally red cow needs to be found with a bunch of different requirements that we can go into another time. And eventually, once this cow is found, it needs to be slaughtered in a specific ritual. It's burnt, its remains are burnt, and then its ashes are mixed into water. And then the water is sprinkled on the person who is impure from contact with a dead body. And so then that, supposedly according to the Torah, and this is all narrated in the book of Numbers, okay, in the beginning of Parashat Chukat, which is in chapter 19, that after they are sprinkled with this water, then supposedly according to the Torah, they are pure and able to access the temple precincts. They're spiritually pure. This is a very strange mitzvah. One of the reasons that it's very strange, actually, that's commonly talked about, is that the Kohen, the person who is preparing the sacrifice and preparing the red heifer and burning the red heifer and mixing its ashes, actually becomes spiritually impure from the process of making the red heifer. But the red heifer itself and the ashes that come from it, the product that comes from it, actually acts as a purifying agent, even though the process itself makes the person who did it impure. It's very confusing. And honestly, it's a super weird mitzvah. Even the Midrash, even our rabbis themselves say the mitzvah is really weird. It's one of the great mysteries of the Torah. The only person who ever really understood the spiritual meaning of the red heifer was Moses himself. It's because supposedly God told Moses that secret, but no one else has really understood the secret of the red heifer. And to this day, we don't understand the mitzvah of the red heifer. Interestingly enough, actually all of us this day are spiritually impure, because at some point all of us have had or been in contact with a dead body of some sort, or been in its area, which makes us spiritually impure. And actually, therefore, none of us can access the temple grounds. Now, the good thing is that the temple, well, not necessarily a good thing, but the fact is that the temple hasn't been around for a long time. So there's no need to access the temple precincts. But this is going to be important if there is going to be a reestablishment of the prophesied third temple. One of the things that needs to be done first is the finding of this red heifer and the preparing of the solution, which, again, people have not found this red heifer for a long time. But this is one of the things that are going to problems that are going to need to be solved if we're actually going to ever really have a third temple. We'll see about that. Now, I think it's important to talk a little bit about the spiritual meaning before we go, and why do we have to read this parsha before Pesach? Well, in Pesach, it was one of the 3 holidays where we would sacrifice a korban. We would make a korban, a sacrifice, in the temple precincts. So everyone had to enter the temple precincts to make the korban Pesach, to make the sacrifice of Pesach. of the Paschal lamb. And so therefore, it was a reminder to people during temple times to purify themselves with the ashes of the red heifer so they can be prepared to make the Pesach sacrifice. So there was a very, very pragmatic reason to read this. This was like a reminder to the congregation. But I think spiritually, there's something really important here, right? The mystery in general of being purified, especially when experiencing death or seeing death or being around death and healing from it and getting better from it and being able to access God again is quite a mystery. It's something we don't really completely understand, and it's possible, but very hard. But it is important to understand that God can purify us. That ability to come up from darkness, that ability to come up from feeling separate from God in this stage of dark mourning and in sadness, right? We can become purified again. We can come close to God once again. We can enter the temple precincts once again. But if you want to ask why, if you want to ask how does it work? What's the science behind it? That you're not going to know. It requires a lot of faith and a faith in God to restore us, to help us purify ourselves in the spirit of Pesach, to refresh us, and to come back to God. Enjoy the reading this Shabbos. Let's turn to the Mishnah Torah on Pesach. We're going to study today and learn about the laws of what kind of chametz can we use. How can we use chametz the day before Pesach, Erev Pesach, which means the day before Pesach. So this is the 14th of Nisan. Can we eat chametz on that day? And you would think, yes, right? It's not Pesach yet. Why can't you eat chametz? Maybe there's a reason not to eat chametz because you might get crumbs around the house and you might then have to check the house again, search the house again for different things like this. But the reason actually is that the idea is that according to the Torah, we actually don't eat chametz or benefit from chametz, all of the above, after noon on that day. Now, it's not the noon that we know in America, but rather it's halachic noon. And so that's a time that you want to look up, right? In general, on a Zmanim website or something like that, but it should be somewhere near our noon. I can look it up eventually what time it is, and we'll remind once we get closer to Pesach when this time is. It's going to be different, obviously, based on where you are. So it's important to say, though, that the reason that we can't eat chametz after noon or halachic noon on that day is because afternoon was when the Korban Pesach, when the Passover sacrifice was offered. And we're told, according to Maimonides, according to our Talmud, according to the Torah, that we can't eat and consume chametz while we're preparing the Pesach sacrifice. God forbid that chametz can be mixed in with the Passover sacrifice. That would obviously be bad. And so the Torah restricts us from eating chametz all the way from noon, even the day before Pesach. Now, the rabbis wanted to put a fence around this, right? This is what the rabbis often do because they are very afraid that you are going to violate a Torah law. It's very serious to violate a Torah law. So the rabbis put up gzerot or fences around the Torah laws to make it so that it makes it harder to violate the Torah law. So the gezerah, the first level of fencing that the rabbis created for this particular mitzvah is that actually we start an hour before that. So the rabbis say don't stop eating chametz at noon, but rather stop eating chametz at 11 o'clock, the hour before noon, right? And in halacha, this would be called the 6th hour of the day. The day starts from when sunlight comes out, right? Then 6 hours of the day, so that this would be around 11 o'clock, right? Halachic 11 o'clock, right? According to our rabbis, there is a decree that we can't eat chametz or benefit from chametz, even from that hour. Okay, so it's moved 1 hour back. Now, there is another idea in the Talmud that we see that this was even pushed further. That the idea is that what happens if it's a cloudy day? And remember, back then, they didn't have watches that made it easy to know exactly what time it is. What happens if it was cloudy outside, right? And you couldn't exactly tell what time it is, or you're stressed with the Korban Pesach. So what the rabbis did actually was even move it back 1 more hour. So that they moved it all the way back to halachic 10 o'clock, right? But specifically only with the prohibition of eating. We could actually, from 10 to 11 o'clock, benefit from chametz, meaning we could sell it or get some benefit from it, as long as we don't eat it from 10 to 11. Once halachic 11 in the morning starts, then we, according to our rabbis, can't eat and can't benefit from chametz. But after noon, then it actually becomes a full-fledged Torah violation that you can't eat or benefit from chametz. And so really, in the end, what's important to know is that you're not going to be able to eat chametz starting sometime around 10 o'clock, right? And of course, refer to your local rabbi of when this is near you, or your Zmanim website. And if you obviously need one, you can certainly email me if you need to know how to check Zmanim in your particular locale. But what's really important, again, is that we can't eat this chametz after 10 o'clock, and we can't benefit from chametz until after 11 o'clock, and eat chametz. Now, the benefit part is important, right? Not only if you have a business that sells chametz, but it's really important, especially if you have a pet. If you have a dog, and the dog food has chametz in it, or a mixture of chametz in it of some sort, right? Then at that point, right, the dog can be fed the normal dog food all the way up till 11 o'clock, because you're not eating the chametz, the dog's eating the chametz. But because the dog's eating the chametz, you obviously benefit from the chametz. So you can actually have the dog eat all the way till 11 o'clock, although you can't eat after 10 o'clock that day. And so that's the laws of how we deal with chametz on the day before Pesach. Let's turn to Menorat HaMaor. We learned in the previous session, and we started learning a midrash about how it was prophesied to Abraham that his descendants would one day be enslaved for a long, long time. And we learned through the midrash on this that it wasn't only about Egypt and the fact that his descendants would eventually be enslaved in Egypt, but it's actually about all of the galuyot. It's about all the exiles, all the suffering that we had. And that the Midrash actually goes through the verbs themselves and the words, and actually assigns to them different enemies of the Jewish people: Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and hints at them in this verse to show that really it's about not just about Egypt, but about all the suffering that we face as Jews. And that this is, and I said that this was actually part of the relationship of Judaism, right? That we're going to suffer sometimes. We're going to face darkness sometimes. It's going to be hard. It's not like sort of something that should never happen. It's something that actually we should know from the outset, that suffering will happen, that we will go through darkness, we will be enslaved. And I think that's what we want to add in today. So the next part of this midrash is the idea of that, how God says after that, after God says that you're going to experience this darkness, this hard things, while during the brit, bein, habetarim, during this what the scene is called in Genesis 15, the covenant between the parts of these animals that are being sacrificed. Abraham has this awful darkness he experiences. God says to Abraham, "Vayomer la'Avram yeda teda," right? And this is the 13th verse of the book of Genesis, where he says to Avram, "But surely you should know that eventually I will redeem you." Right? And the Midrash notes, why is this verb repeated? And you might have heard me say, surely, right? Surely you shall know, because this is how the way they teach us to translate in rabbinic school. Right? When a verb is repeated in biblical Hebrew, it means not only you should know, but it's actually an amplification. You should surely know, right? It's not just you should surely know, right? But the Midrash draws even more of a connection with this. It says that there actually is... there's going to be two parts of every part of this. And this is what the Midrash goes. First, it says, know that I will scatter them, but also know that I will gather them in. Right? So you should know, Avram, that these bad things will happen, that they will be your descendants will be scattered across the world. But don't worry, I will gather them in. And just as surely as you should know that I scattered them, so too surely you should know that I gathered them in. And it actually goes through two more different things different ways of thinking about this. It says, know that I will mortgage them or hand them over as a pledge, right? So this is, again, if you are borrowing something from somebody, you might give them a pledge to keep with them until you return the item. And so here it's envisioning the Jewish people sort of as one of these pledges, that they're going to be enslaved for a little bit of time, but eventually they will be released. And just as certainly that know that I will redeem that pledge. I will release them. right? So very, very important. Just as we know that we've been mortgaged, whatever that means, so too we will be redeemed as well. And lastly, it says, know that just as I will enslave them, right? That we were enslaved in Egypt. And it's interesting, the Midrash says, I will enslave them, not the Egyptians, I will, right? The rabbis see that everything comes from God, even the bad things, even the hard things. But know for certain in the same way that I will redeem them, right? I will free them from slavery. And just as surely in the same way. So I think what this Midrash is sort of pointing out to us, that when we see darkness, when we experience darkness in our life, we shouldn't be surprised. That's sort of part of the picture. We should try to do tshuva. We should try to work to see how we can do better. But just as surely as we experience darkness, part of our relationship with Hashem is to know that we will also experience being freed from this darkness, that the darkness is always going to be temporary, that we will be redeemed from whatever darkness is. Why? Because we're God's people, and the Menorat HaMaor will get into this in future sessions and future chapters, but we're God's people, right? And if we fail, if we're not redeemed, if they're not rescued in the end, how does that look for God, right? That wouldn't be so good for God. So because God is perfect and God is great, eventually, because we're God's people, we will be redeemed. Now, how it might happen is a whole mystery in itself. How quickly it might happen. And obviously, we need to do a lot of tshuva, a lot of repentance to affect this in some way or other. But we should know and have faith that whenever we experience darkness in our life, don't worry, the salvation will come. It might not come in the schedule you want it to come in, but it's going to come. Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Daily Derech. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email me anytime at rmr@templeofaaron.org. Thank you so much for listening. There are so many people to thank, and you can look in the show notes for that. And also, if you want to know and see any of these texts in the original, we actually have that too. You can actually find that in our episode description. So look in each of the episode descriptions, and you'll find that information right there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.